Hey y'all, I'm Hope, and today I'm starting the next episode of my 2021 Goodreads Choice Sci-Fi Fantasy Nominees reading project, which is a mouthful. But today's episode is on the From Blood and Ash series by Jennifer L. Armentrout. The third book, which I think is The Crown of Gilded Bones, was nominated as Best Fantasy in 2021. It didn't win, but since it's the third book, I do need to read several books to get to it, and I hadn't picked up this series at all yet. I had already been kind of considering reading this series because I had heard that it could be a good pick for people who liked A Court of Thorns and Roses, which I really enjoyed when I read it, but I've also heard that it is very repetitive and hard to follow at times, so I really am not sure what to expect here, if I'm going to end up loving it or end up hating it. I guess if I hate it, this video will just be really short because I'll just DNF it and then rant for a little bit, and then that'll be it. Or maybe I'll really enjoy it and it'll be great. So who knows, we're gonna find out. It's gonna be an adventure either way, and that is the plan. I'm gonna be starting the first book from Blood and Ash today. I just got the hold in from my library yesterday, and I have it as an ebook, so I need to read it before it has to be turned back in, because a lot of times I can't renew things if people are waiting, and there was something like 53 people waiting when last I looked. So I do need to go ahead and knock it out. So that's the plan. I'm gonna go start reading the first book, and I will check back in with you guys in a bit. So it feels like a bad sign that I'm already trying not to make eye contact with this book, and I'm not even out of chapter 1 yet. It is just so boring and info dumpy right now. It's literally just Poppy hanging out in the Red Pearl, not doing anything, not interacting with anybody, just hanging out, listening to other people talk, and like having internal monologues about things. And it's like just such a weird variety of things. Like, she's internal monologuing about like gender as a construct, and here's the current political situation of this country, Macedonia, which is just the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia with some letters changed. And then like her brother Ian, who has not shown up yet, she's just thinking about him for no apparent reason. And then like thinking about the Red Pearl, which is weirdly like completely irrelevant to everything happening. She seems to be in the Red Pearl looking for some sort of freedom that we are told that she doesn't have otherwise, although there don't seem to be any real restrictions on her at this point. But the Red Pearl literally doesn't matter. She could be sitting in a city park dissociating and thinking about these things, and it would not change what's happening. She could just be like having a stream of consciousness monologue whilst dissociating somewhere on a bench. Like, the Red Pearl doesn't matter. Nothing matters. She's not doing anything. This feels like a high level of salt for me this early in the book, and I think it's because I've seen so many people really love this book, but I am so fucking bored reading about Poppy just dissociating in a tavern or a gambling den. Unclear. Not sure what the Red Pearl is. Also, nobody in this book sounds like they're from the same place. Like, they all have different names. So we have an Ian, very normal name. We have Poppy, which like I'll accept that as a name, except that her full name is Penelope Balfour, which I'm like, that's kind of a weird name, but alright. And then you have like some guy named Finley, fine, normal name. Some guy named Phillips Rothy. First of all, why is his first name Phillips plural? Rothy is a weird last name and is also the same name as a character in the Murderbot Diaries, so that feels a little weird. There's a guy named Eric, spelled A-I-R-R-I-C-K, Eric, which I kind of hate. And then there's like other characters, the Duke, what the fuck is his name? Dorian Tierman, and then his friend Brandol Mavine or Mavine or something, or no, Mazine or Mazine. It's a Z instead of a V. So none of these people sound like they're from the same country. None of these people have like any kind of similar names. Like, I guess if this is explained as like Macedonia is this place where a lot of people kind of come and go, and there's a lot of trade and kind of lots of people immigrating or emigrating from like into and out of the country. Like, if that was the explanation, sure, but I'm guessing it's not, because there's this whole thing about the rise and this like massive wall that keeps people out of the city and keeps, particularly, I'm guessing, monsters out of the city. But it doesn't sound like it's the kind of place where there's a lot of movement of people. So I'm just very confused about like why all of their names are so wildly different. It does feel a little bit like that joke about like when you see a friend group and none of them looks like they're dressed going to the same place. It's a little bit like that, except for it's like citizens of Macedonia, except none of them are named like they're from the same country. It's just very strange. Yeah, there's so many different names, but like the setup just does not seem to mix with like the idea of a place where there's a lot of like people kind of coming and going, or trade with other places, or people moving into or out of the country, because they have giant fucking walls keeping things out everywhere. So I don't know. I'm bored and confused, and I'm hoping things pick up when we get off the Red Pearl. For the moment, I'm just kind of like sticking with it because I know that Hawke has to show up at some point. I know that he shows up during the scene on the Red Pearl, so I'm hoping that he gets here soon. I feel like he's like somewhere skipping the prologue, like sitting on his couch with a controller hitting X over and over again, which is what I would like to do with the prologue here. Yeah, high levels of salt, and I'm sorry, but I just need things to pick up because right now I don't want to read it. Okay, crisis averted. I am actually now 50% into Blood and Ash, and I am enjoying it now. I think there's this kind of 60 to 75 page exposition hurdle you have to get over, where there's just a ton of front loading of information, where we're given a lot of like info about the political situation and about the not quite the religious system, but some of the beliefs of the people in this kingdom, which it literally took me 50% of the book to remember that it's the Kingdom of Solace, which just makes me think of Solus from Dragon Age. So anyway, I'm calling this the Kingdom of Eggy. So the Kingdom of Eggy, we learn a little bit about like the political situation, a little bit about their beliefs surrounding like the Craven and the Ascended, a lot of things like that, and it just kind of gets front-loaded in a way that I think is a little unnatural, because it's just like the protagonist, Poppy, thinking about these things while meandering around. But once you get through that, you get to about page 60-ish, and she actually starts to do stuff. We find out about her relationship with Victor, who is one of her personal guards. He's kind of a father figure to her, and it turns out that she is working a job with him. And so we start to see more of their relationship, which I think is really sweet. I really like that part of it. It almost certainly means he's marked for death, but like I'm enjoying the kind of father-daughter relationship that's happening there. We've met Hawke now, and he surprisingly does not become relevant again for like another 100 pages. It takes a long time for him to show back up, but he's back in the story now, and I actually really like Hawke as a character. I like the characterization of him because, I mean, obviously he's kind of portrayed initially as kind of a womanizer. My battery is flashing, hang on a second. And we're back. Okay, back to talking about Hawke. He's portrayed kind of initially as kind of a womanizer. When he first meets Poppy, he thinks she's someone else, but then is like perfectly happy to sleep with her anyway, or at least attempt to. But he's also portrayed as being quite respectful. He always asks her consent for anything he does. And then once he shows back up again, this continues. He's very gentle and kind. He's willing to help her and other people with various things. So he's portrayed in this really like kind of warm way, which I think is really interesting. I was very much expecting him to be the like sexy knife danger man kind of love interest, and he's really not that, but I do really like him. He is not necessarily shown as being not dangerous, but that's not like his like defining personality trait is the thing. So I am liking Hawke a lot. I also like a lot of the side characters. I really like Victor. I really like Poppy's friend Tawny, whose name I hate. Tawny Lion. Terrible name. I hate it so much. But I'm liking a lot of the side characters. There's also some antagonists who are like cartoonishly evil. It's very easy to hate them, and it's kind of fun to hate them, so I'm like, okay, I'm here for that. There is still a lot of information being presented, where there's sections where you're getting like tons of exposition, but it's not as frequent now. It's kind of like every once in a while you get a long section or a long paragraph of like, here's all the gods in this realm, stuff like that. There's beginning to be a little bit of mystery happening, not a lot, but a little bit. And that's kind of fun. And then we're getting more information about the Ascended and the Craven. The Craven are kind of interesting too as monsters, because they seem almost like a blend between vampires and zombies. They're created from people who've been bitten by Craven. And their belief is that Craven were originally what happened to people who were bitten by Atlanteans, who are like the evil kingdom that was defeated in a war 400 years ago. So it's believed that the Craven were created by the Atlanteans. And then the Craven can create more Craven, and they very much behave like zombies, like they move in giant hordes, and they attack as a horde, and they're like trying to get over the wall into the city of Macedonia, which I have realized is now a city. It's not the name of the kingdom. I thought it was the name of the kingdom at first. But they behave like zombies, but they're like vampiric. They drink blood. They tend to behave like vampires. But it was just an interesting mix But yeah, now that I'm actually in, I'm enjoying it. It's a lot more fast-paced and fun now that I'm actually into the plot bits. However, it does feel a little drawn out. Like, some of the scenes are a little longer than they really need to be. Particularly some of the conversations between Poppy and Hawk tend to just kind of drag on and on and on. But other than that, I'm enjoying it. It's definitely got my attention now that we're past that initial hurdle. Okay, I have finished From Blood and Ash, and I have some mixed feelings about the latter half of the book. I think that the story really kicks off and it becomes much more interesting plot-wise in the latter half, and there's a lot more characters introduced that I really liked. I particularly like Kieran, who doesn't really do much until the latter half of the book. I liked some of the others, Delano and Niall or Nail. I'm not sure what his name is, the spelling kept changing. But like, there's some fun side characters that I really enjoyed. But I had some issues because Poppy is really fucking stupid. She is too dumb to live. There were so many like warning signs of things that were coming, and she was just missing them left and right. I think the biggest one, and this is minor spoilers, I will like mark, I guess, in the title this is spoilers, but like, Hawk is not Hawk. He's an Atlantean. And it takes her way too long to figure this out because, like, at the beginning of the book, she reads this whole thing that's like, Atlanteans look like mortals, but they have unusually sharp canines. And then she, like, multiple times in the book remarks on Hawk's unusually sharp teeth. And I'm like, ma'am, please, just use your brain cells. So there's a lot of that. There was another one where she's like, it's weird that he seems to know the name of this woman that he's only just met. Even though, very clearly, they know the other guy that's there, who is obviously related to this woman. Like, this other guy, Elijah, comes in and he's immediately friendly with Hawk and Kieran, and clearly they know him. So she thinks it's weird that Hawk knows the guy's niece's name. Like, I don't know, it just didn't make any sense. She was really stupid. And a lot of the, like, relationship development in the very last chunk of the book is very weird because it flips-flops between them hating each other and loving each other, and it's much less of a romance than I was expecting, which I'm fine with. I actually am more interested in their, like, having a complex relationship dynamic given the kind of political situation between the kingdoms that they're from. But, like, it just, all of a sudden, like, there's reveal after reveal, and we're getting this, like, flip-flopping of her opinion on Hawk / his real name, which I will not reveal that bit, but, like, I don't know. It was just kind of mixed overall, but I do really like the characters, and I am willing to read further into the series. So I will not be DNFing the series, at least at this book. So I guess now it's time for me to pick up Kingdom of Flesh and Fire, except that I need my library hold to come in, so hopefully soon. So my hold on A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire came in way faster than I was expecting. I looked at it yesterday. Today is the 26th of January. I looked at it yesterday and it said 7 weeks, and I was 4th in line. I was like, okay, cool. Great. It gives me some time to finish my current read and a couple other things I want to get to. Today, I looked at it this morning and it said 4 weeks, you're 3rd in line. And I was like, I'm cutting it a little close now. And then this afternoon, my hold came in at like 4:58, like just as before I was leaving work. So I guess I'm gonna spend the next 2 weeks trying to power through a couple more things, and then we're gonna start A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire. I would go ahead and start it. I did go ahead and borrow it, but I'm actually in the midst of a Desolating Gold piece at the moment, which is for another one of these vlogs. I really need to finish that, and I planned to read Acosta first as well for another one of these vlogs. So soon I will be starting A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire, but unexpectedly sooner than I thought. So I really meant to update in the middle of A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire, but I completely forgot to do that. I was caught up in the race of trying to finish the book before my library loan ended, and I did finish it. I had a day to spare, but I forgot to update in the middle because I was just reading so much. So anyway, I think I kind of disagree with the general trend of reviews that I've seen. I think on Goodreads and in reviews I've heard from other people on BookTube, I've kind of generally heard that people like the first book a lot, they like the second book a little bit less, and then the third book even less, or maybe they like the second book kind of equally to the first book and then dislike the third book. But I actually think that the second book is better than the first book, and I think it's because of the pacing. So the first book has this like 100 pages of just like info dumping, exposition, world building stuff that you get through at the beginning that's just like Poppy standing in various places thinking about elements of the world, just being like, oh, and this is the political situation of Solus, and here's what the Craven are. and it takes forever for the story to actually start. I think that the first book starts well before the story actually needed to start, and then the pacing is fine through the middle, and then the end is kind of batshit insane. This book was much more evenly paced across the entirety of it. It still has like a crazy twist at the end, but you're starting from a point where there's a lot of setup before things actually move along. The second book starts right in the middle of the same conversation that the first book ends on, but there's stuff happening. So they don't, like, they're supposed to be going on a road trip basically. They don't leave for like 200 pages. So like, know that going in. But there is actually stuff happening while they're still in the city that they're in. There's a lot of Poppy learning more about the world, and it's, rather than it being her like thinking about things, it's her kind of talking to other characters, becoming involved in the politics of the situation where she wasn't before. So it's Poppy actually like going and doing things and talking to people where that information is given, so it's not quite as slow. So I think the pacing in the beginning of this book is a lot better. It was much easier to get into. I think that bit didn't need to be so long, and really the story starts around the 200 page mark when this kind of first antagonist of the book actually shows up. I think that's where the story really kicks off. So I think that the beginning was too long, but it wasn't as slow as the beginning of the first book. So I think the pacing is better there. I did find the dialogue extremely repetitive. Basically every conversation Poppy has with Kieran and Castile is just like, Poppy has a question. Kieran mocks Poppy for having questions because she asks a lot of questions. Poppy says something angry or violent. Castile says that turns him on. Poppy tells him that there's something wrong with him. That's like every conversation they have. There's some version of that, like every single time they talk to each other. And the fact that the entire book is Poppy traveling with Kieran and Castile means that it's happening constantly. So I think that the dialogue is really repetitive, and some of it's pretty cringy. There's some things that Poppy says where I'm just like, no person in their right mind would actually like talk like that, unless they were maybe like a really edgy teenager. So Poppy is a teenager, so like maybe it makes sense, but there was a lot of it that just felt very like cringy, and like Poppy was trying a little too hard. So I did have some issues with the dialogue, but again, the pacing was better, and I actually like the direction that the story took. I thought that a lot of what we learned about Atlantia was really interesting. A lot of what we learned about Castile was really interesting. We get a lot more of his backstory in this book, and there was a lot more of the characters that I really like, which are the side characters, like Kieran and Delano and Nail. I really like them. New character Jasper, I really like him. Alistair gets more time in this book. So there was a lot of side characters that I really liked. So on the whole, I think I like the second book better, and it took me much less time to get through. I think it took me 5 days to read this, and it took me like 8 or 9 days to read the first book, and like 4 of those days were just reading the first 100 pages. So I got through this one much quicker, and I enjoyed it a lot more. I'm not excited to go into the third book. I actually downgraded my rating on From Blood and Ash to a 3, and then rated A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire to a 3.5 because it really was not a 4-star read to me, but I did think it was stronger than the first book. But I'm intrigued enough about the direction that the plot is taking that I am interested to see where all those plot threads go, and also to find out what kind of fucking insane ending the third book gets, because that seems to be JLA's kind of standard way of ending books. So my hold on The Crown of Gilded Bones finally came in a couple of days ago, so I've been reading it for the last couple of days, and I'm maybe 250 pages in, and I have some thoughts at this point, because I think that this one is quite different from the first two in terms of its pacing. The first two both start out very slow with a lot of exposition, which I think was done better in the second book than the first book, but they're very slow. They're building up a lot of like further information about like the world and some of the characters. This one very much leaps in with action. You start in the middle of the same scene that the previous book leaves off on, which is a very action heavy scene. The action continues, and most of what I've read so far has been kind of action-y stuff. I've just gotten to a portion that's kind of like the downtime. There's been maybe 50 or so pages of that. It's downtime between kind of major events. I also think that this one has a lot more involvement with the side characters, where they're much more in focus than they were in the previous books. They're getting a lot more interactions with Poppy, and we're getting a lot more like development of their personalities. So I'm really enjoying those parts. I did feel like the beginning was a little bit too like 0 to 60 too fast. The cliffhanger and then like starting there didn't quite work in this one, because you have no downtime at the end of the previous book and no downtime at the beginning of this one, so we haven't really gotten a chance to see Poppy and Castile's relationship outside of either fighting and action or them having sex. So their relationship hasn't like developed romantically. So all of the action at the beginning of this one I think fell a little flat for me because it's supposed to be kind of like underscoring the threat to their relationship and the threat to Atlantia as a whole, but because we didn't have that downtime in the like building of their relationship in a way that's like kind of emotional connection, there is some, but it's not really the focus. I felt that was harder to care about them and like the peril that they're in at the beginning of this book. That being said, I did like that this wasn't such a slow start and I read it very quickly. I've gotten to the point that I'm at very quickly. So I do like that aspect of it. On the other hand, now I'm in book 3, the repetitive dialogue is still going. Like, we're still getting the same things of like Kieran complaining about Poppy having a question, and Castile reminds Poppy for the umpteenth time that he finds it attractive and arousing when she's violent. And it's just getting old at this point because it's the same bits over and over again. If I have to read about Castile's dimples one more time, I might scream, and that's definitely going to happen probably in the next few pages. So there's that. So this is a weird experience because ultimately I think that my reading experience for this book so far is the same level of enjoyment. Like, I'd give it the same star rating as the previous 2 books, but the things that I'm enjoying in this book are very different to the things that I enjoyed in the previous books, and the things that I disliked in the previous books are continuing to kind of pile up in this book. One thing I am really loving is the relationship between Kieran and Poppy, because it's developing a lot in this book, and I really like their friendship. So I'm a little bit disappointed in how little development I feel like Poppy and Castile's relationship is getting in comparison with the development that her friendship with Kieran is getting, because her friendship with Kieran is adorable and I love it. Also, King Valen, I really like him so far. Maybe he turns out to be evil or something, but at this point he's like super reasonable and empathetic and compassionate and kind towards Poppy, even though he doesn't necessarily want her there or like her. He's just a reasonable dude and I like him. He's more reasonable than his son. So we shall wait and see if he turns out to be evil. But so I finished what's the third one, The Crown of Gilded Bones today, and I gotta say I disagree with a lot of the reviews I've seen. I noticed there are a lot of like 3, 2, and 1-star reviews, and I've seen several booktubers that I've watched. Back in the Books is the one that I can think of off the top of my head, who have read and enjoyed the series, who have said that they dislike the 3rd book, that it's kind of the weakest of the first 3. And I gotta say I disagree with that. I really liked a lot of what was happening in the 3rd book. I will say it's still not like a series that I want to go out and buy for myself or anything, but I had a lot more fun with this entry than I did with the previous ones. I think that I disagree with a lot of people that I've seen reviews that wrote there was no plot in this book. I think this actually has the most plot of the 3 entries. What it does have, and I think maybe this is what some people don't like, is it's a weird pacing, and this is one of the issues I have with it, is there's some kind of structure and pacing issues, but the opening is like launching you in the middle of some action. So you're in the middle of an intense fight scene when you start the book. So it's very high action for a little bit, and like maybe the first 100 pages, 150 pages are pretty high action, and like you're getting a lot of information, it's quite intense, and then the last little chunk is also, there's a lot going on. But in the middle of it, there's still plot going on, but it's much more like on the political side of things. It's much more to do with Poppy and Cass kind of grappling with the political situation within Atlantia. So there's a lot more of that. So the middle kind of has this lull of action where there's like a couple of little pieces of action, but not as much as the beginning and end of the book. And I think that coming out of the earlier books, which had much less action, a lot more like walking around, it's kind of a weird pacing thing because it's very high action, kind of a lull, lots of action again. But on the whole, I really enjoyed this one because in between all that action, it was the stuff that I've been missing in the earlier books. There is a ton of character development here, for Poppy certainly, and I really enjoyed the way that she got to kind of grow into her powers and slowly figure them out. So there's a lot of character development for her, but there's also quite a bit of character development for Castile. I still think he needs more, and I do want to see more of them together because I think there's a lot of kind of circumstances in which we're not getting to see them as they work together now that they're at the point they're in their relationship. So I think that's kind of one of my issues there. But there's a lot of character development as well for a lot of the side characters. We learn a ton more about Kieran. We learn more about Emil and Vanetta and Kira and Jasper. We learn more about Alistair. We finally get to meet the king and queen of Atlantia, Valen and Eloana, and I really like them. Valen may be one of my favorite characters. I think he's really interesting. So a lot of the stuff that's happening in that lull in the middle where there's less action and less kind of like obviously forward-moving plot is just building up these characters and kind of developing their relationships, and that's the stuff that I love in stories. So I really enjoyed this installment in comparison with the earlier two. I actually downgraded my ratings on the earlier two because I feel like this one doesn't quite reach a 4-star for me because I do have some issues with the pacing and the structure, but I enjoyed a lot of what was happening here more than I enjoyed the earlier two installments in the series. The other issues that I kind of had with it that bumped it down had a lot to do with the dialogue and the repetitiveness, because there's this thing where, I think I've mentioned this at least once already, but there's, look at me being repetitive talking about a repetitive book, but there's these like certain kind of interactions that repeat over and over and over again pretty much anytime Poppy is talking to Castile and or Kieran. So there's a lot of that, but there's also this thing that JLA does in these books where like every time a character is mentioned that was previously been in the story but isn't now, we have to have like a little rehashing of who that person is and what they meant to Poppy and like what happened to them, why aren't they here now? So there's a lot of repetition that felt weird because it was like, if you're reading this book, I feel almost certain you've read the earlier two, and so you really don't need to be reminded who Rylan is. You should already know that. So I guess maybe this is helpful to readers who maybe don't have as strong a memory for the earlier two books, or it's been a long time, but there were just sections where I felt like we were getting too much stuff, too much material that was just reminding us of things that we already knew. So that was kind of one of my other issues, kind of repetition. Also, I think the foreshadowing in the series is not very subtle. A lot of it is like, Poppy is going to think consistently about this thing until it shows up. So like, I have a strong prediction for one of the earlier books, or not the earlier books, one of the later books, one of the ones that's still coming out, that I feel pretty certain I'm gonna be right on, because anytime Poppy thinks kind of repetitively about a specific thing, of course it's gonna be important, and there's gonna be a twist reveal to it. Like, that's just how it works. Also, there's this thing that I have an issue with in the kind of beginning and ending sections, where when JLA is doing these kind of reveals for things, the plot twists, they tend to come in like 4s and 5s. So you're not getting just like one interesting twist and kind of looking at the repercussions of that. You're getting like a twist, but then another twist, and then another twist, and another twist, and there's not really kind of time to process those twists and like what's actually happening. So those are my main issues with the book. But again, ultimately this was a really enjoyable read for me. I liked this one way better than the earlier two books in the series. And I think I'm intrigued enough, at least by the side characters and kind of the direction the plot has taken now, that I may actually continue on with the series when the 4th book comes out. I really wasn't thinking I was going to. I wasn't even sure I was going to get to the end of the 3rd book when I was reading the 1st one, because I just had so many issues with the pacing and structure there. But yeah, I've now finally finished the series, and I think in terms of the Goodreads Choice stuff, I kind of agree that this one didn't really need to win. I don't think it's as strong as the other books that I've already read, which is not very many at this point. I do think it is weaker than A Court of Silver Flames, which won, because I have read that now. And I also think it's weaker than the other one I've read, which was A Master of Jinn. So I agree with this one not having won, but I know that this series has a lot of popularity, so I do see why it was included, and I think it also made it to the 2nd round, so I totally get that. Anyway, that's pretty much it for today's video. I hope that you've enjoyed this kind of vloggy style thing as I've read through this entire series. This has really been an interesting experience. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you'll consider giving this video a like if you liked it, and subscribing to see what comes next. And I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.